As his wife paused and met his gaze, John responded, "I understand." Lately, it seemed he was uttering those words more often than not, and he grew weary of their repetition. Reflecting on their 22-year marriage, he pondered how he and Diane had arrived at this juncture. They had raised two wonderful children, now in college, in the lovely old house Diane had inherited. Together, they had modernized it, adding a pool and detached garage. Their home now boasted an open floor plan and a beautifully renovated kitchen, a source of pride for John. Additionally, they owned a charming beach house in Hatteras, North Carolina, which John had kept unchanged from his childhood days, cherishing the memories it held. John, now a senior vice president at Central Logistics, and Diane, a senior accounts manager at Richards & Son, both enjoyed successful careers. They appeared to have it all: a beautiful home, accomplished children, fulfilling careers, and a happy marriage until... Noticing his wife's silence, John realized Diane was waiting for his response. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" she inquired. "I understand," he replied, though internally, he felt a sense of disconnect. John surreptitiously marked another tally on the sheet of paper before him, the 32nd time he had uttered those words in the past 2 days. It was time to address the underlying issues. "We seem to agree then," Diane began, but John interrupted, shaking his head. Meeting her gaze squarely, he asserted, "I would never betray you, and I cannot condone you betraying me." Diane, taken aback, protested, "I've never cheated on you." "In my mind, and perhaps yours too if you're honest, you have," John countered. He recounted instances of her lunches and meetings with someone else, which had evolved into intimate encounters. Now he's booked a room at the Jefferson Hotel and made brunch reservations. His intentions are clear. As John observed Diane's reaction, he continued, "You've also made preparations, hidden lingerie from Victoria's Secret. Your intentions are just as obvious." Allowing a moment for a response, John outlined 2 options. "This Saturday, I'll be at the beach house. You're welcome to join me, and we can work through our issues. Alternatively, you can choose to continue down this path." Diane remained silent, prompting John to conclude, "The choice is yours." John paused, observing Diane's reaction. Her unreadable demeanor, a recent development, troubled him. "Your other option is to proceed with your plans for Saturday," he stated firmly. "Meet David Summers at the Jefferson Hotel, enjoy a romantic dinner at Bookbinder's Restaurant, dance at the Tobacco Company Club, and return to consummate your affair." "Look at me," John insisted, and Diane reluctantly met his gaze. "You can go ahead with your plans. I won't stop you because the moment I leave without you on Saturday morning, our marriage is over." Diane's astonishment was palpable. How did John know about their weekend plans? Before she could speak, he continued, "I have connections where you work. Your colleagues are worried about you, and David Summers has no true friends." Diane tried to defend herself. "I've been faithful for 22 years. John interjected, "No, you were faithful for 21 years and 10 months. You've been seeing David since your first lunch with him." "I've never cheated," Diane protested. "You've already slept with him," John countered. Diane rose to her feet, denying the accusation. "You have, I've seen it in your eyes," John persisted. "The same eyes that once gazed into mine with love, now turn away. How many times were you with him while we made love?" Diane attempted to regain control, professing her commitment to their marriage. But John saw through her words, reminding her of the intimate lunches, secret texts, and evenings spent with David. "I know everything," John asserted, "and how I found out doesn't matter. The crucial thing here is that you grasp what I'm saying. Do you understand?" Diane simply gazed at him with eyes that seemed foreign to John. He sighed softly, realizing she didn't comprehend the gravity of her actions. John rose from his seat and exited the room. He headed to their bedroom, went through his nightly routine, but sleep eluded him. Diane remained still for a while before moving to the couch. She picked up her phone and dialed her friend Janice. "John knows everything about David and our plans for this weekend," Diane disclosed. Janice's concerned response was immediate. "That doesn't sound good. Please tell me you're canceling." Diane hesitated. "I don't know if I can. I've made promises to David, and he's invested so much for this weekend. Janice urged her, you made promises to John too. Remember, I do. Summers can cancel without losing a dime. Besides, that's no reason to betray John. I'm not betraying him, Diane protested once more. Yes, you are, Janice countered. When I shared about George and me, I made it clear we had each other's consent. We chose together and ensured it wouldn't impact our marriage. I told you everything, and we're still working through our issues. You're risking everything for a coworker, Janice implored. Please reconsider, end it with David, and apologize to John. Diane softly replied, but I need this. Just one last time with another man. David is good, and the women at work say he's great in bed. A good guy wouldn't do this, Janice asserted. Think about the consequences. You're not just another conquest to him. I won't be, Diane insisted. Janice wanted to shake some sense into her, don't you see? David isn't worth it. I've met him. He's not John. Can't you see that? I do, Diane whispered. Janice pleaded, please, think about it. It'll affect everyone you love. Diane sighed, I thought you'd understand. I thought you, of all people, would get why I need this. Janice tried one last time, Diane, it's not about us. It's about you not understanding the consequences. Please don't do this. Diane remained resolute. John knows what I've done so far, and he hasn't stopped me. He may not like it, but he'll understand. It's important to me. I need to sleep now. As Janice hung up, she turned to her husband George. She didn't listen to me. I regret telling her about us. George nodded. We agreed to keep it private. Janice sighed. I needed to talk to someone. I never imagined it would lead to this. George held her close. I understand. I confided in John too. Janice hung her head, feeling a mix of guilt and regret. You told John. I can only imagine his reaction. Did he suggest kicking me out or labeling me with a scarlet letter? George responded, you know John better than that. He asked me questions, made me think about us. He said, you two made this choice together. It was a mistake, but only you two can fix it. He made me realize we're in this together. He might be the reason we're still together. Janice teared up, whispering, he might be the reason we're still married, and we might be the reason he's divorcing. George held her close. Don't blame yourself if they split. John's right, they need to work through this together. Meanwhile, Diane slipped into bed, finding John still awake. They turned away from each other, the distance between them palpable. They rose silently the next morning, not exchanging a word. After Diane left for work, John took the day off. He walked through the house, photographing every room and its contents, cataloging what to keep. He planned to empty the man cave, a room Diane disliked. He copied their wedding photos onto a thumb drive but couldn't bring himself to open their album. Despite finding nice apartments, he knew he'd miss their home and the life they built. At his appointment with Sandra Lewis, they reviewed a straightforward settlement proposal. Diane would keep the house and her retirement, while John would retain the beach house and his retirement. They'd pay off debts and set aside funds for their children's education. Sandra noted John's silent agreement, arranging for Diane to be served with divorce papers. As John left, Sandra sensed his melancholy. Later, at the bank, he set up a separate account and changed his direct deposits. He ensured all financial matters required both their signatures, a symbolic gesture of their shared past. John informed his lawyer, Sandra Lewis, about freezing the accounts the day after Diane was served. He couldn't bear the sympathetic looks from his longtime advisors, realizing others would react the same when news spread. The thought of telling their children about the divorce weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, Diane avoided David Summers at work. At lunch, they met at Maria's cafe, their usual spot, but Diane was distant, feeling as if they were being watched. Oblivious to her mood, David excitedly talked about their upcoming weekend plans. Back at the office, Diane felt uneasy, suspecting some coworkers were reporting to John. After an unproductive day, she left the office, noticing the Central Logistics logo on one intern's hoodie. Meanwhile, John completed his tasks and stopped by Maria's cafe for a meal. Maria updated him on Ben's success in baseball and offered comfort about Diane. John, feeling dejected, ordered crab cakes and a beer. Back home, Diane prepared John's favorite dinner, intending to discuss her plan with him. She hoped he would understand or, at least, accept her decision. While the crab cakes baked, she changed her clothes, ready to broach the conversation. She wanted to present herself nicely for him before meeting Janice and Lisa later for drinks to discuss her plans for Saturday. Carefully, she retrieved the garment and Victoria's Secret bags from her closet and placed them in the trunk of her car, not wanting to cause any embarrassment. John arrived home to the aroma of dinner cooking, surprised by the gesture. Diane handed him a pale ale and suggested he relax while dinner finished cooking. They sat down to Maryland-style crab cakes and steamed broccoli, a favorite of John's, although he found himself wishing they were dining elsewhere. Despite the silence, Diane attempted to explain her feelings to John, expressing her love for him. But John, coldly interrupting her, claimed he understood, then abruptly lost his appetite and left the table, his words cutting deep. Diane sat in quiet contemplation, questioning her choices for the first time. Eventually, she tidied up and texted Janice, asking to meet earlier. Meanwhile, John, feeling the weight of sadness, resorted to sleeping pills to ease his troubled mind, knowing he needed rest for the following day. At the bar, Diane observed the interactions around her, feeling a sense of desperation and loneliness in the air. Her friends arrived, and she braced herself for their conversation. Lisa's outburst left Diane taken aback, but she responded with a polite greeting, acknowledging her friend's evident anger and hurt. Turning to Janice, Diane awaited her response. Janice, too, expressed disapproval, refraining from further explicit language but conveying her concern nonetheless. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Diane managed a sad smile, noting Janice's restraint compared to Lisa's colorful vocabulary. Janice affirmed her love for Diane regardless of her decision. Lisa, still reeling, offered her support, albeit with a caveat of inevitable "I told you so"s. Diane thanked her friends for their unwavering love, recognizing their differing viewpoints but affirming her commitment to her chosen path. Lisa emphasized the gravity and folly of Diane's actions, while Janice underscored the betrayal and disappointment they represented. Diane, grateful for their support, excused herself to complete her preparations for the following day, urging her friends to enjoy a drink in her absence. After finishing her errands, Diane returned home to a somber atmosphere, reflecting on her choices. In a moment of vulnerability, she sought solace in their wedding album, only to find herself overcome with emotion. Resolved but troubled, she prepared for the night ahead, donning lingerie and packing her belongings. Leaving a note for John, she quietly departed, determined to see her decision through to its conclusion. John woke up and glanced at the clock, registering the early hour. His realization that he was alone in bed startled him. Had she already gone to David Summers? The mere thought pierced him deeply. Doubts flooded his mind for the first time. Should he have allowed her that one night, just to satisfy her curiosity? Was his pride and ego worth sacrificing their lifetime of happiness together? As he reflected, John knew that if she chose to be with David, he could never love her the same way again. Despite their years together and the mutual respect they had built, he couldn't accept being second to another man. He hoped against hope that she was still in the house, perhaps having stayed in another room. Searching the bedrooms yielded no trace of her return. In the kitchen, he found a note on the coffee maker with a simple plea, "Please understand." Collapsing into a chair, John couldn't contain his tears. He had feared this outcome, yet somewhere in his heart, he had hoped she would choose differently, that she would remain by his side. After starting a pot of coffee to steady his nerves, John showered and dressed, packing a bag with essentials. As he prepared to leave, he took one last look around the home they had built together. With a heavy heart, he switched off the lights and closed the door behind him. The chill of the morning air sobered him as he descended the steps. But as he approached his car, he noticed it was running, and in the back seat, he saw her belongings. Opening the door, he found Diane sleeping peacefully. Overwhelmed with relief and joy, he couldn't hold back his tears. Gently closing the door, he made his way to the driver's side, where Diane stirred awake. Their exchange was quiet, filled with unspoken emotions. Diane explained her early vigil, expressing concern that he might leave without her. John's heart swelled with love and gratitude as he realized they still had a chance. Sharing a moment over a few donuts, they set off, the promise of breakfast at the Virginia diner warming their hearts and signaling a new beginning. Diane shook her head. I'm not exactly dressed for the Virginia diner. John looked puzzled. Diane, the Virginia diner doesn't have a dress code. You can wear pretty much anything in there. Diane grinned. I know there's no strict code, but I figured just about anything doesn't include just about nothing. With a playful gesture, she opened her coat to reveal the purple lingerie set underneath. Well, that's certainly daring, John remarked. Is that a new coat too? Diane nodded. Yes, I swapped the dress for this coat. And in case you haven't checked the Victoria's Secret bag, I returned the other lingerie and got these just for you. She gently lifted his chin to meet her gaze. This outfit, and everything underneath, is for your eyes only, now and forever. After a moment, she continued, I owe you an apology for everything I've put you through lately. You were right about almost everything. There were only two things you got wrong. Last night, I dressed up for you and no one else, and I did meet Janice and Lisa. The other thing you were wrong about was David. He never entered our bedroom. I couldn't look you in the eyes not because I was thinking of him, but because I was ashamed of what I was considering. I'm embarrassed to admit it didn't stop me from planning to be with someone else. Looking at him earnestly, she whispered, I truly understand now. He kissed her, feeling a rush of relief. As he drove, he knew they had much to discuss and repair in their marriage, but the fact that she finally understood filled him with hope. Passing the Virginia diner, he glanced at Diane, who had drifted off to sleep. He hoped to spend Monday undoing Friday's mistakes. And he knew that any honest conversation ahead would involve his own confession. Recalling an evening 7 years ago, he had been celebrating a career success in San Francisco while Diane was back home with their sons. That night, he had succumbed to temptation with a colleague, a mistake that haunted him. Debbie tossed him her blouse and bra as she opened the door to her room. He watched as she undressed completely, standing nude in the doorway and reaching for his hand. But John couldn't move. It was physically impossible for him to enter that room. His erection had vanished, replaced by thoughts of his wife and their family. Looking at the beautiful Debbie Maris, he couldn't find a single reason to go any further. He backed away and practically ran back to the elevator. Once in his own room, he showered, desperate to rid himself of Debbie's scent. It was 1 a.m. back home in Richmond, but he called Diane, needing to hear her voice. After several rings, she sleepily answered. John assured Diane he was fine and shared the good news of his success and promotion. He cried tears of relief as she expressed her pride and love for him. In that moment, he realized Diane's opinion was all that truly mattered to him. As John drove to the beach, he knew he had to tell her. He needed Diane to understand why he truly grasped what she had been feeling. Having been in her shoes, he could honestly say, I understand. Once Diane recommitted to their marriage, David Summers faded from their lives. But for those curious. Epilogue. David Summers sat alone in Fred Davis's office at Richards & Sons. Fred, the VP of HR, had summoned him the moment he arrived that Monday morning. Confused, David couldn't comprehend why he was here. Sure, he had missed some deadlines lately due to his pursuit of Diane, but he could catch up. This meeting disrupted his plans to talk to Diane about their weekend. Not only had she stood him up, but she had sent her friends, Janice and Lisa, to deliver the news. David recalled Lisa's intimidating presence. Despite his father's military background, Lisa's ability to curse left him speechless. Even hotel security seemed hesitant to intervene during their confrontation at the Jefferson Hotel. Glancing around the room, David's eyes fell on a photo of Fred Davis posing with another man next to a large fish. A sudden realization struck him as he recognized the other man, John Thomas, a face he had seen countless times on Diane's desk. Turning to return to his seat, David froze at the sight of a family portrait on Fred's desk. It featured Fred, his sons, and his smiling wife. Now aware of Lisa's last name, David understood why he was here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.